Caroline Whitmore stepped forward with the fluid confidence of someone who had never known defeat. The lights above her shifted, casting a pale glow across her tailored blazer and the obsidian silk of her skirt. Each carefully measured step seemed to command the very air around her, compressing it into a tense silence. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the world contracted until only the two of them remained. Caroline raised the delicate slip of paper between thumb and forefinger, studying it as though it were a trivial trinket beneath her notice. Her gaze was sharp, almost surgical, cold, assessing, reeking of contempt. She arched an eyebrow, the barest quirk of her lips hinting at a smirk. Meredith, meeting that glare without flinching, exhaled slowly. She felt the familiar cloak of determination settle around her shoulders, a quiet armor forged in countless past trials. Around them, the room hummed with barely suppressed curiosity. Whispers skittered from group to group like frightened birds. "Did you see that look?" someone murmured. "She's not even glancing at her properly." A hush fell as Caroline's stare bore down on Meredith's ticket. In that frozen heartbeat, spectators felt the electric charge crackling through the air, an unspoken promise of spectacle. Meredith's pulse throbbed in her ears, each beat a drum calling her to stand her ground. She allowed herself a single, subtle nod. Calm, composed, she met Caroline's appraisal head-on. Behind her steady eyes, a storm raged. Memories of every sneer, every condescending tilt of the head Caroline had ever delivered. But now the tables had turned. Meredith would not yield. The overhead lights flickered, accentuating the tension. A faint hum from the ventilation system seemed unnaturally loud, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Caroline lowered the ticket, the gesture languid as a coiled serpent, and spoke without moving her lips. "You're in my way," she said, though her voice remained locked within the cold confines of her expression. It was as though she shared her thoughts only with the smallest flicker of her eyes. Meredith let the silence hang between them, thick and unbroken. She breathed evenly, drawing strength from the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Inside, she felt a surge of power, an acknowledgement that she belonged here just as much as Caroline did. She raised her chin, a steely glint lighting her gaze. "I paid for this," she finally replied, voice low but unwavering. The words cut through the hush like a blade. And in response, Caroline's lips curved into a sneer so subtle it might have been imagined. She cast a glance at the onlookers, her posture straightening, as though to remind them all of the hierarchy to which they were meant to defer. Then, in a motion that was almost too refined to register, she extended her arm and flicked her wrist, sending the ticket spiraling through the air. Time seemed to slow as the thin strip of paper arced skyward. It spun, revealing its printed face one moment, the blank reverse the next. The audience inhaled collectively, shock knitting their brows. The ticket did not land gently. It cut through the space between Caroline and Meredith like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Meredith's heart lurched. She knelt swiftly, letting the world blur at the edges as she reached for the fallen token. Her fingers closed around it, the texture of the glossy cardstock pressing into her palm as though challenging her to acknowledge its power. Her breathing accelerated, each inhale tasting of adrenaline and resolve. Up above, Caroline watched with an expression of bored superiority, as though she expected Meredith to snatch up the ticket and retreat. But Meredith did not retreat. She rose, ticket clasped firmly in her hand, eyes fixed unwaveringly on Caroline. Her cheeks were flushed, not with fear but with the heat of indignation. A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere, glasses clinked against a tray, someone's phone wrenched from their hand. But all eyes remained fixed on the two women, each unwilling to look away from the confrontation unfolding before them. Meredith smoothed the ticket with a decisive motion before bringing it up level with her chest. The gesture was deliberate, almost ritualistic. She let the silence settle again, allowing the weight of that simple act to speak volumes. Caroline's cold gaze flicked down briefly, then snapped back up, as if surprised to see Meredith still standing. Then, in an almost imperceptible movement, Meredith's jaw clenched. Without a word, she tore the ticket in half, the fibers protesting with a soft, pained rip. Each fragment drifted to the ground like pale remnants of Caroline's expected authority. The sound was small, yet in the hush, it thundered like a cannon shot. Caroline's eyes widened just slightly. Her hand, still half raised from the previous gesture, froze in midair. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she might lunge forward, reclaim the pieces, restore the sanctity of the ticket. But something held her back, a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. Meredith straightened fully, her posture firm. She surveyed the torn fragments at her feet with a hint of disdain. Then she met Caroline's eyes and spoke, her voice steady but laced with quiet triumph. "Maybe now you'll understand what it means to be dismissed." The words were delivered without anger, but their clarity was enough to strip away any veneer of Caroline's superiority. A murmur spread among the spectators. Hands flew to mouths in shock and admiration. Some nodded, as if to themselves, acknowledging the fairness in Meredith's act. Others exchanged glances, uncertain whether they had witnessed an act of rebellion or a breach of etiquette. The overhead lights shifted again, focusing a brighter beam on the two women. In that stark illumination, the victor and the vanquished were both revealed. Caroline's face, once composed in haughty arrogance, now registered a flicker of doubt, a recognition that she had underestimated Meredith's resolve. Beyond the immediate confrontation, the atmosphere in the room crackled with anticipation. No one moved to retrieve the torn ticket halves. They lay abandoned, symbols of the ruptured balance of power. Meredith remained still, eyes locked on Caroline's, daring her to react. Caroline's breathing became shallow. The mask of indifference she had worn so flawlessly seemed to crack. Her lips parted slightly, as though to speak, but no sound emerged. She opened her mouth again, closed it, and then, with a soft but audible exhale, turned her head away. That motion, so small yet so definitive, sent a shockwave through the gathering. Caroline Whitmore, unflappable and untouchable, had conceded the moment. She stepped back, lowering her hand to her side, as if retreating into herself. The lights dimmed around her, and she seemed to shrink beneath their gaze. Meredith dropped her gaze to the floor for a fraction of a second, as if to reclaim her composure. Then she lifted her head, allowing the light to catch her face. Her expression was calm, but beneath that calm coursed a fierce pride. She exhaled, shoulders relaxing, as though the tension had drained from her body. In that instant, the crowd erupted in subtle applause, hands tapping gently on seats, murmurs of approval rippling outward. Some even rose to their feet, offering a standing ovation to the woman who had dared to defy the unspoken rules of their world. Caroline, meanwhile, stood frozen for a moment longer. Then she straightened her blazer, as though adjusting to a new reality she had not anticipated. Her gaze returned to Meredith, but now it held a grudging respect, edged with lingering bitterness. Meredith turned away slowly, ticket fragments abandoned at her feet, and walked toward the exit. Each step resonated with authority, as though she carried more than just her own destiny. A message for anyone who had ever been dismissed or belittled. The lights followed her, spotlighting her passage through the hush left behind. As Meredith reached the door, she glanced back one last time. In her eyes was a promise. She would not be ignored again. Then she stepped through, leaving Caroline and the assembled audience to absorb the magnitude of what had just transpired. The door closed softly behind Meredith, and the silence that had settled felt different now, charged, alive with possibility. Caroline exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to release months, perhaps years of unchallenged authority. The room remained still, uncertain whether to erupt in celebration or retreat in shock. But the moment had already been claimed. Meredith's quiet, unyielding defiance had upended the balance of power in a single, shattering move. And though the echoes of that confrontation would reverberate long after the lights went down, one thing was certain: neither woman would ever be the same again. Meredith's footsteps faded into the corridor's muted glow, but the reverberations of her defiance continued to pulse through the hall like aftershocks of an earthquake. Caroline Whitmore remained rooted where she stood, her gaze fixed on the closed door as though willing it to reopen. Around her, the audience had begun to stir, some whispering in clusters, others raising phones to record the shards of torn ticket still scattered on the floor. Footsteps approached from the side hallway. Security personnel, summoned at Caroline's earlier gesture, now fanned out to contain the simmering crowd. But the room's energy was already too volatile to be contained. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man in a crisp suit, cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, we need to..." He trailed off, apprehensive to disturb the charged silence. Caroline finally turned to him, her face an unreadable mask. Then, in a voice low and deliberate, she said, "Let them film." The guard exchanged a puzzled look with his colleague but fell silent. Caroline's concession only fueled the onlookers' excitement. The phones tilted upward, lenses zooming in on the aftermath. Meredith's fragments of paper, the triumphant set of her shoulders as she strode away. No sooner had Caroline given that instruction than the first clip of the confrontation appeared on social media, accompanied by the hashtag #TicketTakedown. Within seconds, the video's views climbed into the thousands. Comments scrolled. "Did you see that? She just destroyed the CEO's authority. That is the most satisfying moment I've seen all year. Meredith for president." Caroline felt a flutter of panic in her chest. Her carefully cultivated image, built over years of boardroom victories and high society appearances, now teetered on a knife's edge. She looked out at her captive audience, the sea of faces illuminated by phone screens. Their fascination had shifted. They no longer saw a flawless VIP hostess enforcing protocol. They saw a bully undone. Caroline's mouth tightened. She raised a hand as if to command attention, but the hum of collective excitement drowned out her authority. Someone shouted, "Replay it! On loop!" And the projection system, still streaming live footage, obliged. Meredith's silent nod, the flick of Caroline's wrist, the ticket tearing in Meredith's hand, all replayed in slow motion, set to a pounding drum beat added by an unseen spectator. Caroline's mind raced. She could attempt to salvage the moment with a public apology, but that would look like a confession of weakness. She could order security to clear the hall, but that would only paint her as vindictive. Instead, she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and allowed a cool, imperious smile to replace the flicker of doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice emulated through the speakers, "thank you for your enthusiasm. Rest assured, this matter will be addressed." She paused, letting the words land. "But in the meantime, let us proceed with tonight's program." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some applauded out of politeness, others cheered reluctantly, still hungry for more drama. Caroline gave a curt nod and swept down the aisle, her guard opening a path through the throng. Yet as she passed, she felt the weight of their gazes, no longer reverent but expectant, even hungry for spectacle. The dust of the torn ticket lay like a stain on the polished floor, a constant reminder of the power that had slipped through her fingers. Outside the hall, Meredith paused under the bright exit lights. A young woman holding a smartphone rushed up. "Excuse me, Meredith, right? I just want to say that was incredible. I live-streamed the whole thing." She thrust the phone toward Meredith, who read aloud the top comments. "She's a hero. That CEO won't recover from this. Pass this around. Instant viral gold." Meredith's cheeks warmed, not from pride, but from the dizzying rush of 1,000 unseen eyes now trained on her. She managed a small, thankful smile before the woman hurried off to spread the footage further. Meredith turned her gaze to the avenue beyond. A sleek black limousine idled curbside, Caroline's backup transport, no doubt. But Meredith had no intention of disappearing quietly. She remembered the promise she'd made to herself as she tore that ticket. She would not be dismissed again. She stepped onto the sidewalk and lifted her phone. Opening the social feed, she tapped into a live broadcast feature and pressed record. "Thank you all for witnessing what just happened," Meredith began, voice steady, though adrenaline crackled beneath her words. Tonight wasn't just about a torn ticket. It was about reclaiming respect that so often gets snatched away by those who think they're above us. Power isn't something you hold over someone. It's something we recognize in each other. She gestured behind her toward the hall, where the doors remained shut. "If you believe in fairness over intimidation, share this. Let's show that dignity can't be ripped apart, and that when we stand our ground, we shift the balance." Her live stream took off instantly. Viewers surged into the thousands as Meredith spoke. Parents who had watched their children bullied, employees who'd endured toxic managers, anyone who'd ever been silenced by someone more powerful. Comments poured in, hearts floated by the dozen, retweets escalated exponentially. Within minutes, respect for Meredith eclipsed Ticket Takedown as the evening's dominant trend. Back inside, Caroline returned to her podium, determined to regain control. She cleared her throat. "I am aware that emotions are high," she said, scanning the crowd whose attention fluttered between her and their glowing devices. "Meredith's actions, though disruptive, will be dealt with." She paused, letting the word "dealt" hang darkly in the air. "However, let us not let one incident overshadow the significance of tonight's agenda." She motioned to the speakers beside her and the lights dimmed, refocusing on a gleaming display case at the stage's center. A hush fell as a new product unveiling was about to commence. But the moment had passed. Whispered murmurs rippled through the audience. "What product? I heard she's lost thousands already. I just watched her live." "Meredith is going to blow this up." Caroline clenched her jaw. She had hoped that a slick presentation, glossy videos, celebrity endorsements would drown out the scandal. Instead, Meredith's live broadcast had mobilized an army of grassroots support. Caroline pressed a button on her tablet, hacking off the live stream feed to the giant screen. The product video towered above them in cinematic widescreen, the background thumping with a synthesized bass. But glass cannot block wind, and the gale of social media still blew relentlessly. Sensing her window of opportunity closing, Caroline pivoted. She raised her voice, injecting a theatrical lilt. "Let us now welcome the CEO herself to unveil our latest innovation." The audience obliged with polite applause, but many faces were fixed on phone screens rather than the stage. Caroline's assistant, perched discreetly at her side, whispered in her ear, "The live feed. Meredith's going viral. Shares are doubling every minute." Caroline inhaled slowly. She realized that to reclaim the narrative, she needed to confront Meredith directly, publicly, decisively. Without waiting for permission, she strode to the exit, flanked by security. The audience parted automatically, sensing that the real show was about to resume in the corridor outside. Moments later, Meredith's live broadcast still hummed on hundreds of screens as Caroline emerged, her expression steely. She stopped a few feet from Meredith's camera frame and looked her in the eye. The circle of onlookers tightened, phones raised to capture every micro-accession. Caroline chose her words carefully, projecting them so that both the crowd and Meredith's microphone picked them up. "Meredith," she said, voice calm but firm, "while your stunt tonight was dramatic, it was also reckless. You cost this company thousands in equipment charges and security overage. I expect a formal apology." Meredith's live feed caught every nuance. the slight curl of Caroline's lips, the barely perceptible narrowing of her eyes. Meredith tilted her head, as though considering the weight of Caroline's demand. Then she replied, voice low but clear, "I apologize for nothing. I acted because respect can't be bought or barked into existence." She lifted her chin defiantly. "If you want an apology, apologize to everyone you demean with that contemptuous glare of yours. Apologize for thinking your status makes you above decency." A collective gasp echoed down the corridor. Caroline's face flickered with rage, an instantaneous flare before she masked it with composure. She inhaled, stepping closer until she and Meredith were nearly nose to nose. "Be careful, Meredith," she hissed. "You may have won tonight, but you're playing a dangerous game." Meredith smiled, a small, triumphant curve of her lips. "The only danger," she replied, "is believing that power resides in a sliver of paper. True power lives in deeds and respect. I suggest you remember that." With that, Meredith ended the live stream and slipped her phone into her pocket. She turned and walked away, her heels echoing down the corridor like a judge's gavel. Caroline watched her go, chest heaving, then turned back to face the cluster of phones still pointed at her. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and, in an act of sheer will, lifted her chin. When Caroline finally returned to the stage, the hall fell silent. She stepped to the podium anew, placing her hands flat on its surface. The projection system flickered off Meredith's clips, replaced by the company's logo. She took a breath, then spoke with a voice that brooked no contradiction. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you have witnessed not just a performance, but a reckoning. I invite you now to join me in moving forward. Together," she gestured grandly to the screen, which now displayed the new product name shimmering in gold letters. But in the back of the hall, conversations buzzed with a new refrain. Respect earned, not demanded. Phones loaded Meredith's final words on repeat. The seeds of a cultural moment, one of empowerment, of upheaval, had been sown, and while Caroline's product launch proceeded under a veneer of order, the real story was already unfolding beyond the walls. Meredith's stand against condescension had become a manifesto, circulating on every platform, calling countless others to tear up the tickets that sought to limit them. The night ended with polite applause, but as the crowd dispersed, the air throbbed with fresh possibilities. In the digital realm, Meredith's defiance soared, a viral spark that promised to ignite change far beyond that gilded hall. And somewhere, Caroline Whitmore, her empire momentarily shaken, must decide whether to crush that spark or to fan its flames into something greater than she had ever imagined. Meredith Winslow's heels clicked against the polished marble of the lobby, each echo carrying her back to the day she first strode into a cavernous shareholder hall, young and determined. Spotlights had swept the room as she climbed the dais, her voice ringing out clear and unyielding. "We will never accept prejudice in any form." She remembered the roar of applause, the swell of pride, and just beneath it, the fierce spark of anger toward every naysayer who'd ever told her she didn't belong. "I will make her regret underestimating me," she'd vowed, eyes blazing brighter than any chandelier. In the present, that memory sharpened her resolve. She pushed through the revolving doors and into the cool night air, ready for whatever came next. On the other side of the corridor, Caroline Whitmore moved toward her private offices, each step heavy with bruised pride. The hallway lights seemed to dim around her as she replayed another memory. The day her boss had cornered her in a glass-walled corner office, a slide reading, "Guest Experience Metrics, Urgent," flickering behind him. "Miss Whitmore," he'd said, voice as precise as a scalpel, "your handling of Mr. Langford yesterday was inflexible. We can't have that." Her jaw had clenched so hard her knuckles went white. Though she'd smiled and nodded, inside she had trembled at the thought of losing that carefully curated veneer of authority. I cannot let anyone see me falter, she'd promised herself. Now, Carolyn rounded a corner and froze. On a glossy side table lay her phone, buzzing with missed calls and urgent notifications. She picked it up and scrolled. Respect for Meredith trending worldwide. A video of Meredith's corridor confrontation playing on repeat. Without warning, her vision blurred with panic. Every tweet and share chipped away at the image she'd spent years building. She raced through the messages. This is the clapback of the century. I've never seen such poise under pressure. Caroline Whitmore has met her match. An icy knot formed in her stomach, but beneath it flickered something darker. A determination to reclaim her narrative. Caroline opened a draft apology. I apologize for any offense caused. I will personally address this matter to restore trust. Her thumb hovered. Would conceding fault look weak? Yet ignoring the firestorm seemed even worse. She pressed publish, sending her own face and practiced words into the same feeds where Meredith's defiance had sown revolt. Outside, Meredith paused beneath the gleaming marquee announcing tonight's event. She checked her phone. Messages poured in from strangers who felt seen by her stand. I'm volunteering for respect for everyone. This needs to be board-level policy. My respect for you is off the charts. Warmth blossomed in her chest. She tapped out a quick tweet. Tonight wasn't about a ticket. It was about every person who's had power wielded against them. Keep this fire burning. She posted it, slipped her phone into her coat, and turned back toward the building. Inside Caroline's office, her apology video looped on a monitor. She watched, hand pressed to her temple. The mask of composure felt brittle. Her assistant knocked softly. The hall is emptying, but crowds have gathered outside waiting for more footage. Caroline's eyes brightened with a predatory glint. She opened a desk drawer and withdrew an ornate envelope bearing the company's seal, an exclusive invitation to a closed-door press interview she'd arranged. This was her chance to frame the story on her terms. Insights, context, authority, restored. Arrange it now, she told her assistant, and send security to disperse that crowd. She squared her shoulders and stepped out, each footfall echoing purpose. Viral or not, Caroline Whitmore had never backed down from a fight. If the world demanded spectacle, she would give them the greatest performance of her career. Moments later, their paths collided again in the corridor's charged air. Phones formed a semicircle around them as Caroline approached Meredith, gaze steely. Meredith, she said, voice low but carrying. Your stunt was dramatic, reckless even. You've cost us thousands in damages. I demand a formal apology. Meredith met her eyes without hesitation. I apologize for nothing, she replied softly. Respect isn't something you command, it's something you earn. Perhaps you should apologize to every person you've dismissed with that contemptuous glare. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Caroline's lips curled in a flash of anger before she masked it. She leaned forward so only Meredith and the nearest cameras could hear. Be careful. This game has higher stakes than you realize. Meredith's smile was calm, almost serene. The only risk, she said, is believing your power lies in a piece of paper. True power lives in deeds and dignity. She ended her live broadcast and slipped her phone away, heels clicking as she walked off. Caroline watched her go, chest heaving, then turned to face the phones aimed at her. She inhaled deeply, lifted her chin, and reminded the cameras and herself that she was still in control. Back on the stage, the hall fell silent as Caroline reappeared at the podium. She pressed her palms to its surface and spoke with measured authority. Tonight, you have witnessed not just a confrontation, but a reckoning. I invite you now to join me in moving forward. Together, But even as she unveiled the company's new initiative, murmurs rippled through the audience. Respect earned, not demanded. Meredith's words changed me. On social feeds, her final line played on repeat. Beyond the walls of that building, the real story was just beginning. Two women shaped by parallel pasts now racing toward an even more explosive climax. One fueled by integrity, the other by the unrelenting drive to reclaim a shattered image. And as screens lit up with their confrontation, the world watched, knowing that the true victory would belong to whoever could seize the narrative and hold it against the wind. Alexander's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his phone, camera lens focusing on Caroline's retreating figure. "Hey, everyone, look at this flight attendant," he began, voice low but urgent. His finger tapped the screen to activate the live stream, the red live icon pulsing at the corner. She just bullied a passenger, ripped her ticket, and now she's trying to save face. Watch how she walks away like nothing happened. In the corridor's harsh fluorescent glow, Caroline's heels clicked against the tile as she turned a corner, oblivious to the camera trained on her back. Alexander narrated every step. "See how she sachets off? Like a queen who's never met a peasant she couldn't crush?" His audience count climbed by the second, hundreds tuning in, then thousands. The clip was shared instantly across platforms, retweeted under the hashtag #FirstClassShame, before his words had even finished resonating. Comments exploded in real time. "She's the worst. I can't believe how entitled she is. Share this everywhere." The hashtag trended within minutes, a digital avalanche burying any pretense of corporate spin. Alexander felt a thrill. This was more than gossip, more than scandal. It was collective outrage, a living thing that fed on every view and share. As the comments rolled in, Caroline's phone buzzed in her pocket. She paused at a corner, thumb hovering over the screen. Notifications flooded in. Tagged videos, angry remarks, demands for accountability. Her face flickered between calm steel and panic. She swiped at the screen, but the damage was done. Every second Alexander streamed her exit, the clip gained new traction. Behind him, Leah Bennett pressed against the wall of lockers, heart pounding in her throat. She'd watched Caroline's cruelty from the sidelines, heard the sharp tone, seen the contempt in her eyes. Leah was no stranger to uncomfortable power dynamics. She'd once been a junior attendant herself, humiliated by Caroline's scolding in front of peers. But fear had kept her silent. Until now. Leah's breath caught as she made her move. With practiced stealth, she pulled her phone from her pocket, fingers sliding across the screen to record. Her camera framed Caroline's face. Tense jaw, narrowed eyes as she conducted a swift search for damage control, a carefully worded post, an apology video half-finished. Leah angled the lens downward, capturing Caroline's trembling hand clenching the phone and the crisp uniform that bore the insignia of authority. "Here's the real score," Leah whispered into her own mic, voice barely above a breeze. "Watch her performance when she thinks no one's watching." She panned slowly, documenting Caroline's forced smile morphing into a grimace of frustration. Then Leah zoomed in on the small scoreboard taped to the corridor wall, an innocuous clipboard with daily customer feedback ratings. Caroline's name was written at the top, followed by a string of glowing reviews until today. Beneath her score sat a series of red dashes, the marks of dissatisfied passengers. Leah's quick camera flick showed each dash, the evidence of Caroline's slipping reputation. Back on Alexander's stream, viewers shifted to Leah's feed as she posted the footage on the adjacent chat. "This is Exhibit A," she typed, linking the shots of the complaint board under the trending tag, "FirstClassShame." The audience leapt, from harassment outrage to latent outrage at corporate accountability. "Look at those red marks. That board tells the whole story. Everyone file a complaint." In the corridor, the energy crackled. Strangers who had come for a routine layover gathered by the banister overlooking the scene. Phones glowed like fireflies as multiple cameras captured Caroline's every move. Some offered whispered encouragement to Leah and Alexander, while others fanned out to stake out vantage points for more footage. Caroline realized she was surrounded by an audience she couldn't flag down. She squared her shoulders and turned, attempting to reclaim the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, voice firm even as her pulse hammered. "This situation has been recorded from multiple angles, and continuations will be reviewed by our corporate office." She cleared her throat, glancing at Alexander's phone now aimed directly at her. "If you have concerns, please direct them to customer service." "Thank you." Her attempt at control fell flat. A cheer went up when the hashtag ticked past 200,000 mentions. Leah flashed Caroline a look of pity, equal parts sadness and revulsion, before slipping away into the milling crowd. Her role as secret witness complete. Alexander lowered his phone, breath ragged but triumphant. "You saw it here first," he said to the camera. "We made her visible, exposed the ugliness she hoped to hide." His live stream ended with a flourish, a screenshot of Cyrus, the airline CEO's name, tagged under Accountability Now and Cancel Carline. Whitmore. Moments later, the corridor doors swung open, and staff in crisp uniforms, some colleagues, some covert sympathizers, moved in to dismiss the crowd. But the viral tide couldn't be quelled by mere security shooing away bystanders. Screens in every terminal blinked, with Caroline's apology video rewrites and Leah's covert footage side by side. The airline's official channels scrambled to issue press statements, but many came too late to counter the raw, unfiltered truth pouring in from eyewitness live streams. In a small break room just off the main hall, Leah sank onto a chair, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Alexander joined her, sliding his phone into his pocket. He offered her a nod of solidarity. "You did good," he said quietly. Leah allowed herself a shaky smile. Inside the main corridor, Carolina retreated to a private alcove. She leaned heavily against the wall, phone pressed to her ear as she barked into the line. "Get me the corporate PR team now." On the other end, a soft-voiced assistant tried to reassure her. But the hashtag counters spun mercilessly upward. First-class shame had vaulted into the top 10 trending topics worldwide by midnight. Outside, the murmurs turned to chants as a makeshift protest formed by the entrance. "Justice for passengers," they called out. Screens held aloft. Media crews arrived, drawn by the viral spectacle, microphones extended in Caroline's direction. She straightened her uniform, plastered on a smile, and stepped forward into the glare of cameras and questions. Leah and Alexander watched from a distance, united by an unspoken pact. Two allies born of the same outrage, they'd transformed an act of cruelty into a catalyst for accountability. And as the world watched Caroline's next move, the airline's carefully polished reputation teetered on the edge of collapse. In that charged moment, every share, every comment, and every view fed the fire. The story had escaped the confines of a single terminal corridor. It had become a movement, a demand that respect, once torn apart, could be rebuilt only on the foundations of proof and solidarity. And in the fractured glare of phone lights and viral hashtags, Caroline Whitmore stood exposed, faced not just by her critics but by a growing chorus determined to ensure this kind of abuse would never go unnoticed again. The terminal's lights flickered as the low hum of jet engines readied for departure faded into stunned silence. Richard Montgomery, the airline COO, always so immaculately poised, stepped into view with a forced smile. His tailored suit did nothing to disguise the tremor in his hands. "S. Winslow," he began, voice unsteady as he bowed his head almost theatrically. I apologize on behalf of our staff. Please accept our deepest regrets for the distress you've suffered." Meredith stood center stage in the boarding corridor, arms folded, her gaze cold and unwavering. Each syllable of Richard's apology ricocheted off the walls, hollow, insufficient. Without shifting her posture, Meredith spoke in a measured tone that carried through every microphone and cell phone in the vicinity. "I appreciate the sentiment, Richard," she said, watching his face blanch. "But I want action, not empty words." Her next instruction rang like a gavel. "Shut the doors. Ground this flight." Richard's eyes widened. "Ground the flight, ma'am?" Meredith's lips curled into a thin, uncompromising line. "Yes. Notify the gate crew. Boarding is closed. No one gets on or off this aircraft until we've resolved this matter." A junior agent froze mid-step, holding a stack of boarding passes. Another staffer fumbled with a headset. Overhead, the tannoy crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a final boarding call for Flight 487 to Paris. Boarding is now suspended. We apologize for the inconvenience. Please remain in the gate area." A collective murmur erupted among the would-be passengers. Frantic questions. "What's happening? Why aren't we boarding? Is this delay indefinite?" Phones flashed red with notifications, and the hashtag #FirstClassStandstill began to climb. Chaos rippled outwards. Two uniformed officers hurried to Richard's side. He waved them off. He swallowed hard, then pressed his phone to his ear. "Control tower, hold takeoff clearance for Flight 487. I repeat, hold clearance." Red warning lights blinked on the terminal's departure board, an ominous symbol of a grounded plane, stuck in its gate slot like an overturned ship. The departure screen read, "Delayed," in bold crimson against a once pristine blue background. Passengers in first class exchanged anxious glances. Some stormed toward the desk, demanding explanations. Others filmed the spectacle unfolding down the jetway, faces lit by curiosity and outrage. Every device in the hall was trained on Meredith, as if she were conducting a live demonstration on how to wield real influence. From the sidelines, Caroline Whitmore watched the scene unravel. She felt as though the floor had opened beneath her feet. A sharp, guttural expletive formed on her lips, only she didn't dare speak it aloud. In her mind, the words scorched across a backdrop of disbelief. Who is she?" Her knees threatened to buckle. The meticulously scripted apology videos, the PR blurbs, the spin, they all seemed so trivial now. Here stood Meredith Winslow, once an unassuming passenger, now the architect of a full-scale strike against the company she claimed to have built. Meredith stepped forward, each click of her designer heels echoing like a drumbeat of authority. Her coat swirled around her calves, and she raised one hand, palm outward, commanding silence. The shell-shocked murmurs dwindled to a hush. "I'm not here for minor compensation," Meredith said, voice clear as crystal. "I'm here to expose a culture of contempt that begins at the very top." At mention of the top, Caroline's gaze snapped upward toward the executive lounges above the gate. In that moment, it wasn't a title that mattered. It was the raw fear that Meredith could dismantle her entire empire with a single directive. Meredith's eyes swept the crowd. "You see this aircraft?" she continued, gesturing toward the grounded jet. "It represents every promise made to passengers. Safety, respect, courtesy. Tonight, those promises lay broken. And it's my responsibility to see they're restored." A ripple of applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling into an ovation. Even surly travelers in the back rows couldn't help but cheer. Phones recorded, live streams captured every nuance. The world beyond the terminal watched as passengers, once cogs in a corporate machine, aligned themselves with Meredith's cause. Caroline took a shaky step forward, uncertainty etched across her features. Then Meredith turned her gaze directly onto her. "You," Meredith said softly, voice carrying an undercurrent of steel. The entire terminal seemed to lean in. "Don't mistake your uniform for immunity." Caroline's jaw clenched, her posture stiffened as though strapped into invisible chains. She opened her mouth, then closed it, no words coming. Tamara crossed her arms again and exhaled slowly, her next words delivering the final blow. "I'm not just a passenger, I'm the one who built this place." A stunned silence followed. Caroline's breath caught at the confession's weight. Meredith really did hold the key to this airline's foundation. Every credit line, every boardroom decision, every recruitment drive. Meredith's fingerprints were there. Now she wielded that truth as a weapon, exposing the hollow suits who'd forgotten that service begins with human decency. Richard Montgomery paled beside Caroline, realization dawning that their reliance on protocol had rendered them powerless. The engines outside remained silent, the departure board still ablaze with "delayed," and the crowd's energy pulsed with anticipation. Meredith stepped back, gaze softening only slightly. "Tonight, we ground more than a plane," she said. "We ground arrogance. We ground disregard. And until those are lifted, no one flies anywhere." The terminal exploded in cheers and applause. Smartphones soared overhead, capturing the moment for posterity. Over the loudspeakers, a new announcement crackled. "Passengers of Flight 487, please await further instructions. We are investigating a situation at the gate. Thank you for your patience." Amid the frenzy, Caroline's composure finally cracked. She staggered back, pressing a hand to her throat, as though to force down words, but none came. Instead, she stared after Meredith, at the woman who had torn up more than a ticket, who had torn down the facade of corporate invincibility, brick by brick. Meredith turned on her heel, disappearing toward the exit as a chorus of voices followed her. Behind her, Caroline and Richard Montgomery were left with only the echo of her command, and the unsettling knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The terminal's frenetic energy hit a sudden low pulse as Caroline Whitmore was ushered back into the spotlight. Security gently guided her to a makeshift stage set up near the gate entrance, where dozens of cameras and smartphones swiveled to capture every twitch of her expression. Under the harsh glare of flashbulbs, her breath trembled, condensing into tiny puffs of mist in the cool evening air. Clutching the microphone as though it were an anchor, Caroline's knuckles whitened around its slim handle. Her voice cracked on the first attempt. I am deeply sorry, Miss Winslow," she stammered, eyes fixed on the floor. Around her, the hush of the crowd felt like 1,000 accusing stares. Meredith Winslow stood a few paces away, arms crossed, gaze cold and unyielding. Caroline raised her head slightly, meeting Meredith's eyes. They were calm, icy, even, demanding sincerity. The audience leaned in, the only sound the ticking of a distant clock and the faint hum of the ventilation. Caroline's chest heaved as she forced herself to speak louder. "I apologize, Meredith Winslow, for the way I treated you," she repeated, voice hoarse, echoing across the gate lounge. Flashes exploded as reporters documented the moment. Her polished uniform was impeccable, yet her composure lay in tatters. The nameplate pinned to her chest, once a symbol of pride, now seemed grotesque under the neon lights. Each syllable of her apology wavered, as though the weight of her guilt strained her vocal cords. Meredith's lips didn't twitch. She watched Caroline's trembling lips form the words she'd been compelled to utter. When the apology ended, a single deliberate clap rang out. It was Meredith's, slow, measured, carrying the unmistakable ring of finality. Around them, scattered applause followed, some reluctant, some fervent, all marking the end of one spectacle and the dawn of another. Meredith watched impassively as Caroline was led away, each step punctuated by the clack of her now lost heels. The crowd remained hushed, caught between the urge to applaud and the need to absorb the gravity of what had occurred. Phones still recorded, live streams still transmitted, but now the narrative had shifted irrevocably. Between 7 and 8, the airport became ground zero for a digital storm. The moment Caroline's tears first slid down her cheeks, someone's camera had captured it. And seconds later, that clip ignited across every platform. By 7:05, the video had already racked up hundreds of thousands of views. By 7:15, it had vaulted into the top trending topics worldwide under hashtags like Ticket Justice and First Class Fall. Users piled onto the thread with gleeful relish. "Karma served ice cold," one tweeted alongside a freeze frame of Caroline's tremulous smile. "Never underestimate the underdog," another mocked, pairing the footage with a side-by-side of Meredith's steely stare. Comment feeds overflowed with schadenfreude. "Serves her right. That uniform just couldn't hide the arrogance." And "Don't mess with a woman who built the empire she's stepping on." Millions of thumbs-up icons confirmed that the world was utterly captivated and firmly on Meredith's side. Meanwhile, Meredith Winslow, having slipped out of the terminal earlier to avoid the final waves of commotion, watched the unfolding deluge on her phone in a quiet corner of a cafe across the street. Each notification felt like a small victory: shares, retweets, and messages from strangers hailing her as a symbol of woman's power. A trending graphic emblazoned her name beneath the phrase, "Meredith the Mighty," and soon enough, dozens of viral compilations celebrated her refusal to back down, from the ticket toss to the boarding shutdown. By 7:45, major news outlets were picking up the story. Commentators dissected Caroline's meltdown, business writers analyzed the repercussions for the airline's brand, and op-ed pages buzzed about the shifting dynamics of customer power. Influencers launched live panels debating when is it right to fight back, while corporate trainers seized on the drama to illustrate the perils of workplace arrogance. Every corner of the internet seemed to revolve around a single question: could this be the moment consumer dignity had finally leveled the playing field? Back in the terminal, screens in the departure lounge cycled through looping footage of Caroline's forced apology and Meredith's icy command to ground the plane. Travelers paused mid-stride, eyes glued to the displays. Some laughed, others shook their heads in disbelief. Even the gate agents, once fearful of reprisal, smiled as they recognized the name Winslow flaring across their monitors. By the time the clock edged toward 8, the terminal felt electrified, as if everyone had borne witness to a collective reckoning. As the hour passed into 8, the frenzy outside cooled into reflective silence. Caroline Whitmore found herself alone in the now empty staff lounge, her uniform crisp but her spirit in tatters. Under the harsh fluorescence, she stared at her reflection in a full-length mirror mounted on the wall. The woman she saw was a stranger, hair immaculate, posture perfect, but eyes swollen and red-rimmed. Eyes that had finally glimpsed the cost of unchecked pride. Caroline stood and turned back to the mirror. No flourish of uniform could restore her dignity. That would come only through action. She smoothed imaginary wrinkles from her skirt, squared her shoulders, and let her gaze settle on her own reflection. Steadfast, unflinching. "I will learn," she promised herself. "I will apologize, not because I'm forced to, but because I must. I will earn respect, not demand it. And I will start by making this right." She punched open her phone, thumb hovering over the email application. Fingers typed out a message addressed to Meredith Winslow, beginning with the words, "Ms. Winslow, I owe you a genuine apology." Caroline paused, took a deep breath, and continued, pouring into the digital page the remorse she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She ended with a request: to meet, to listen, to understand. Whatever Meredith required to heal the wound Caroline had inflicted. As she pressed send, the terminal's departure board chimed softly in the distance. A new flight was ready to board, passengers milling in anticipation. Caroline straightened once more, squared her shoulders, and, uniform discarded, stepped out of the staff lounge into the fading glow of the terminal. It was time to face the world unguarded and to begin the hard work of becoming someone worthy of a second chance. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the airport's executive lounge as news crews and journalists assembled for the day's most anticipated address. An LED ticker above the entrance silently flicked from routine flight information to announce a special forum. A new era of respect, Airline Passenger Forum. Reporters jostled for position, notebooks open, recorders at the ready. At precisely 9 o'clock, Meredith Winslow stepped to the podium, flanked by 2 senior executives who had once stood behind her, now her partners in this new venture. She wore a simple charcoal blazer and carried herself with that same quiet authority she'd displayed the night before, yet there was a softness in her expression, an openness that invited collaboration rather than confrontation. Stephen Caldwell, the airline's chief operating officer, gave a brief introduction. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," he began, his tone formal but sincere. "What we witnessed yesterday was an inflection point. We recognize that making a single apology is not enough. Last night was a symptom of systemic issues that require real change. It is my honor to introduce Ms. Meredith Winslow, whose courage has inspired our new passenger rights initiative." Alan nodded and took the microphone. A hush fell over the room. "Good morning," she began, voice warm yet steady. "Yesterday I accepted an apology, but I never intended to stop at personal restitution. No traveler should ever feel dismissed or demeaned while flying. Today we begin building a structure to ensure respect is woven into every layer of this company's operations." She clicked a remote in her hand and a simple slide appeared on the screen behind her. Policy for Passenger Dignity and Accountability. Beneath the title, 3 core pillars were listed: mandatory bias awareness training, confidential reporting system, independent oversight committee. Meredith continued, walking through each point with clarity and conviction. First, every employee, from gate agents to pilots, will undergo comprehensive bias awareness training. Next, we will launch a confidential, user-friendly reporting system that empowers passengers and staff alike to document any mistreatment. Finally, we will establish an oversight committee composed of external experts in civil rights, consumer advocacy, and hospitality standards to review incidents and recommend action. Reporters scribbled notes as she spoke. One asked, "Ms. Winslow, how quickly can these measures be implemented?" She smiled. "Within 30 days, training modules will be live. The reporting system will pilot in 2 weeks, initially at this hub, before rolling out network-wide. The Oversight Committee will convene its first meeting next month. Transparency is our priority. We will publish regular updates on progress." Questions followed, each answered with the same focus on concrete steps and timelines. When the floor opened for media interviews, Meredith reaffirmed, "This is not about blame, it's about prevention and empowerment. We learn from our mistakes by listening to the people who experience them firsthand." With that, she stepped down to a flurry of camera flashes, the first official face of what promised to be a transformative initiative. Elsewhere in the complex, Caroline Whitmore sat across from Leah Bennett in a modest break room that bore none of the trappings of the glittering terminal. Gone were Caroline's crisp uniform and polished nameplate. In their place was a dark sweater and a stack of training materials bearing the airline's new logo. Leah studied her nervously before offering a reassuring nod. "I'm glad you asked me to take part in designing the training," she said. "Your perspective, having been on both sides, will be invaluable." Meredith began. "Our first task is to draft the code of respect that will guide all future training, policies, and disciplinary actions." She wrote on a whiteboard, empathy, equity, transparency, restorative justice. The civil rights advocate suggested adding accessibility to ensure that the unique needs of passengers, be they related to disability, language, or age, were explicitly honored. Caroline proposed accountability, arguing that a clear framework for consequences would underscore the seriousness of the commitment. Soon, the whiteboard filled with principles, each debated and refined. As they worked, Leah observed from a side chair, notebook in hand. She marveled at Caroline's transformation. Once a figure of authoritarian control, now earnestly collaborating, jotting down notes, nodding in agreement. Stephen Caldwell closed the meeting by assigning each member a subcommittee: policy drafting, training development, reporting system design, and communications strategy. They agreed to meet weekly and to release a public report within 60 days. Back in the spacious terminal, digital kiosks once used for check-in now displayed Meredith's op-ed, published earlier that morning under the headline, "From Ticket Turmoil to Transformative Change." Passengers paused to scan the QR code at the bottom, submitting their own accounts of past airline injustices. By mid-afternoon, the portal overflowed with hundreds of stories. A medically fragile elderly man left unattended, a transgender passenger misnamed repeatedly, a family separated in customs lines. Customer service reps, once burdened by rote complaints, now had a growing database of qualitative data to help shape policy. When Caroline's turn came, the room quieted. She spoke softly. "I once denied priority boarding to a passenger I assumed could afford a more flexible ticket. It turned out she was battling cancer, flying for treatment. My misjudgment cost her a critical appointment." Tears welled in her eyes as she finished. Silence reigned for a moment, then a fellow attendant reached out, placing a hand on Caroline's shoulder. "Thank you for sharing," she said. "Now we can learn." By the workshop's end, Caroline led a guided reflection on empathy, building exercises, role-playing scenarios, where attendants practiced offering compassion rather than condescension. Laughter and tears mingled as colleagues discovered shared vulnerabilities. Caroline stayed afterward, answering questions and promising to integrate feedback into the next session. Her open-door approach earned her genuine respect from the group, an outcome that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. As dusk fell over the airport, Flight 487, a plane central to last night's upheaval, prepared for departure once more. This time, every sign pointed to a different experience. Marion, an elderly passenger who had witnessed the events unfold, boarded first. She was warmly greeted, her cane offered a seat in the aisle. A father traveling with twins received extra assistance from a smiling flight attendant, who knelt to tie their shoes. In coach, a group of college students received complimentary snacks after disembarking from a delayed connection the previous night. The cabin hummed with quiet camaraderie rather than tension. In first class, Meredith sat beside Leah and Alexander, a self-appointed monitor whose advocacy livestream had first alerted the world to Caroline's cruelty. They exchanged glances as the seatbelt sign dinged off. Over the PA, the pilot's voice crackled. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for flying with us. Tonight, your comfort and dignity are our top priorities. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask any member of our crew." Largely as a seaman, the simple message received appreciative applause, small but heartfelt. Moments later, Caroline emerged from the galley with a folded note in hand. She placed it discreetly in Meredith's lap and ducked back into the service corridor. Meredith unfolded the paper to find a handwritten message. "Thank you for holding us to a higher standard. True leadership is service." Beneath it, Caroline's signature, C. Whitmore. A warmth spread through Meredith's chest as she folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. In the weeks that followed, the airline published its code of respect on every booking confirmation, in every in-flight magazine, and on digital banners lining the terminal walkways. The Oversight Committee convened monthly, publishing anonymized reports showing steady improvements in customer satisfaction metrics and reduced incidents of reported bias. Caroline continued leading training sessions across the network, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and a beacon of transformation. Leah took charge of the passenger portal responses, ensuring each submission received a thoughtful reply. Stephen Caldwell oversaw a redesign of employee evaluations, tying bonuses to explicit respect and kindness metrics rather than purely financial targets. And so, each time a passenger heard the welcome greeting overhead or felt a genuine smile from a crew member, they carried with them the echoes of that fateful night. They knew that respect was not merely a checkbox on a corporate checklist, but a living commitment, upheld by every flight attendant, every gate agent, every passenger who dared to stand up and say, "I deserve to be heard." In the end, the journey itself became a testament that when we ground our prejudices, the sky is no longer the limit. It is just the beginning of a greater horizon of understanding. Meredith's stride was undeniable. Each footfall echoed softly against the polished terrazzo floor as she moved away from the gate, her posture impeccable and unhurried. The soft click of her heels formed a confident rhythm, punctuated by the slightest lift of her chin. In the cool morning light filtering through the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows, she cut a graceful silhouette, poised, empowered, serene. Her dark blazer fluttered behind her like a small banner of triumph, and in her eyes shone the quiet satisfaction of one who had not only won a battle, but had changed the rules of engagement. Passengers and staff paused in their routines to watch her pass. The gate agents, who just hours ago had scrambled to honor her commands, now exchanged smiles and nods of respect as she glided by. Even the morning rush of travelers, laden with carry-ons and coffee cups, seemed to part like a courteous wave. A mother adjusting her toddler's backpack stole a glance and mouthed, "Thank you," without sound. A security officer straightened his belt, tipping his head in acknowledgement. Meredith offered each a small, genuine smile that spoke of gratitude as much as victory. Behind her, the terminal's wide concourse receded into the distance. Rows of steel seats, clusters of late-night arrivals sleeping in chairs, the distant hiss of coffee machines ramping up for the day. All of it framed Merida's departure, as though the airport itself had conspired to showcase her moment of unfettered dignity. A few paces behind, Carolyn Whitmore trudged forward, her gait hesitant and heavy. Gone was the confident swagger of her uniformed days. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of a loss she could neither deny nor ignore. Her once proud chin drooped toward her collarbone, and the crisp lines of her tailored jacket were now rumpled at the elbows. Under her arm, she clutched a small padded envelope. Inside it, the nameplate and cap that had been stripped from her, relics of a chapter she longed to forget, yet could not release. The fluorescent lights above cast a stark glow on her pale face, highlighting the dark shadows beneath her eyes. Each step seemed labored, as if pulling one foot after the other required a conscious effort of will. Staffers who passed her offered sympathetic glances but dared not speak. The hush that had enveloped her exit rendered her isolation palpable. At one point, Caroline's gaze flickered upward, catching her own reflection in a tall glass panel beside the ticket machines. For a heartbeat, she stared at the stranger before her, a woman on the brink of collapse, edges softened by sorrow and edged by regret. She reached out, placing a hand against the cool surface as if seeking reassurance from her reflection. The window offered no comfort, only a blank, unjudging surface that reflected back her shape. Behind that glass, the departure board blinked on time for every flight except one, Flight 487. Its status remained final call, a mocking reminder of the night she had halted its departure. Now, though, the only thing standing between that plane and the sky was Meredith's legacy, and the airline's renewed commitment to respect. Caroline hesitated, her footsteps faltering, and a single tear escaped down her cheek. She brushed it away with trembling fingers, then cleared her throat as if to speak into the emptiness. No words came. Instead, she swallowed hard and continued forward, each tentative step a testament to the turmoil she carried within. In the fleeting space between them, Meredith and Caroline shared no glance, no acknowledgement of each other's presence. Yet the contrast could not have been more vivid. One woman illuminated by grace and conviction, the other swallowed by the darkness of her own misdeeds. As Meredith reached the sliding doors that led to the airport's arrivals hall, she paused and turned her head slightly, as though to take one last look at the place where everything had changed. She lifted her arm in a brief, graceful wave, not to Caroline, but to the staff, the passengers, the world that had watched and learned. Then she stepped through, the doors sealing with a soft whoosh behind her, leaving the terminal hushed in her wake. It seemed as though somehow, moments later, Caroline arrived at the same doorway. She stared at the spot where the doors had closed, blinking back the sting of tears. Gathering what remained of her composure, she forced her shoulders back, squared her jaw, and inhaled deeply. This was her new beginning, or perhaps her reckoning. Either way, she would not collapse here. She turned and walked on, carrying the weight of her choices and the flickering ember of her resolve. Behind her once again, the terminal resumed its rhythm, announcements over the PA, the shuffle of travelers, baristas calling out orders. But something fundamental had shifted. The air felt charged with possibility. Staff broke into quiet smiles as Caroline passed, an unspoken hope that this moment of contrition would blossom into genuine change. And then, as the camera lingered on Caroline's retreating figure, her head bowed and her steps tentative, the screen cut to black for the final moments of the broadcast. A bold, vibrant graphic flashed onto the screen. "What do you think? Does Caroline deserve a second chance?" Beneath it, 2 prompts appeared in bright text. Comment below with your thoughts. Share if you believe in justice and fairness. For a few electric beats, the screen pulsed with anticipation. The airport's ambient noise faded, replaced by the hum of audience engagement. Viewers everywhere paused, fingers hovering over keyboards and touchscreens, ready to weigh in on the question that would define the next chapter of this unfolding story. A final tagline appeared in crisp, clean font. "Your voice matters. Speak up for respect." Then, the broadcast faded out, leaving behind a call to action that echoed far beyond the terminal walls. An invitation for every listener to join the conversation, to shape the future, and to decide whether redemption, once hard-earned, could truly be granted.